I hope you enjoyed the read of Becoming a Soulful Educator and gained something from it. If not, hopefully at least it wasn't so long. I'd like to share a few of my reflections about the book and the ideas that stuck with me. The first thing that I think needs to be just mentioned is that it's kind of like part of a genre of books where the premise of the book is this is what's wrong with what everyone else is doing. This is the kind of educator you should become. In this particular book, it's like defined as an identity. There's a soulful educator or there's a non-soulful educator, and I think you should become a soulful educator and be part of this club. And that's certainly an approach where it's like buy in fully into a new approach. And there's other books and other ideas that try to present educational approaches that could be beneficial. And I think it's important for all educators to read and learn about all these different types of approaches to education. But I always wonder, I don't have a full answer, whether it's all or nothing, or is it possible that ideas that are presented from a different approach could be integrated into a traditional or non-soulful educator could become maybe a little bit more soulful, or is it really soulful or not? So the book makes the argument that there's a extreme or there's a fully in approach that can be taken, but I think it's important for all teachers who read and learn about different approaches to consider the possibilities that there are ideas that can be used and integrated, whether or not you choose to go fully into the author's approach that's being advocated. So what I want to do is just share the things that stuck with me in the book that I thought were most meaningful, touching, or applicable for myself. And I'd love to hear what you found in the book. So going in order, the first thing is in the first page of the introduction on the bottom of the page. He presents two kinds of students, one that found the class stimulating but didn't really get touched by the class. And the second student is someone who was touched and moved and impacted the way the student sees their identity, but didn't really perform as such a good student. And I wonder what you think is preferable. I think it's, I think most people would say that the second kind of student is preferable. I mean, my goal personally in teaching is to impact and touch the students in a way that's really meaningful. I would add just one caveat, which is that if the student says, I didn't really get anything out of the learning in the class, but I had a great relationship with you, and our relationship impacted me. That's one kind of situation where it could be seen as a positive, but the class itself maybe not so much. The second, which I think the author is really thinking about, is where the learning itself touched the student because they really internalized some of the ideas that were being presented, but didn't overall perform as well academically. And that's something that's that I think is more could be better described as a success in teaching. Second point that I noticed, which I thought was really important, is on page 8, where he speaks about the ego of the teacher. And I think it's really important for teachers to just recognize that there's a lot of ego in teaching. There's a lot of how did I do, people comment to teachers about them. I mean, there's a performance aspect to teaching, and there's also a popularity thing. Do students like me? Do they say good things about me? Do they report well about me? Do they think I'm smart? Do they think I'm personable? And it's impossible to completely escape this reality, but I think it's really important to call it out and recognize it. And I think that a teacher definitely should try their best to really be completely, to try to remove their ego from what they're doing, especially in terms of a popularity or being seen as smart or etc. So I think the best way to overcome that is to actually recognize it and notice it, and therefore be able to overcome that temptation. But it definitely exists. Page 13, where he wants to shout from the rooftops that students need to be active. Totally true. I totally agree with that. It's very easy for students to be very passive in the structure of our classrooms because they're sitting in class. That's the basic structure. So this is not unique to soulful education, but it's true about soulful education. But always teachers should be looking for ways to make students more active in the learning process. Page 26, another really important point, that teachers have a fear of admitting weakness. And this also relates to the ego, where a teacher doesn't want to say, I don't know too much. They feel that we're expected to know the answers to all the questions. And it's definitely important for teachers to be willing to say I don't know the answer, or to say that I struggle with this question. Not only that I'm lacking knowledge, but that I struggle to believe this. I struggle to connect to this. Um, the Also on the bottom of the page, he speaks about sometimes students have a harder time connecting to Judaic studies teachers than general studies, because the Judaic studies teachers, like, everything is just like factual. Like, they fully, if you present yourself that you fully believe everything, everything's crystal clear, there's no doubt. Faith is complicated and it's difficult, and people struggle with it. And I think if a teacher lets on that they struggle with it, and they're still fully committed, that could be something that can actually enable students to connect to the teacher, could make the students want to discuss their own struggles rather than feeling that they'll just be judged negatively. A lot of this is not only based on what teachers do, but students inherently assume that they're being judged. They're inherently maybe insecure about their relationship with religion, and they don't want to say something that looks negative in front of the religious teacher. So the teacher has to sort of try to compensate for that and make sure the students feel comfortable sharing their struggles. And it could be effective for teachers to reveal that they also struggle to understand things. Another theme that was in the book over a number of pages was this idea of teachers opening up and sharing their own vulnerabilities versus creating a distance. I think this is an important point, and I think that teachers could gain a lot by sharing vulnerabilities. I think, though, that teachers need to be careful about the context and the dynamic within the classroom before doing that. And I think that the audience that this book is really thinking about is mostly an adult audience. But in high school or below, you have to make sure that the students have enough maturity and trust and rapport before doing that. Page 32 makes a really important point, which is that cynicism is really never good. I mean, skepticism should be distinguished from cynicism. Cynicism could be really destructive, and I think it's really wise what's being suggested to just not allow it at all. Page 34 is a chapter about loving our students, which I think is really important, of course, in an appropriate way. But if students know that the teachers really, really, really care about them, really are invested in them, really care about them. This is another point that was, I don't remember which page, about the lesson isn't the end, but it's the beginning, showing that we care about students by showing an interest in them beyond the class or beyond the year or years that there are students is a very important message to show that teachers care about their students. Page 60 I thought was really interesting, having a mantra that a teacher says to sort of pep us up before we teach was fascinating. And the last thing that I thought that I really want to highlight is page 70 to 71 about personal writing. And this is, I think, a really useful way of taking into practice a lot of the ideas of the book in a very easier way, which is to have time for personal writing. In other words, teachers that are not fully engaged in soulful education might have a hard time creating an environment where students can open up and share and be personal and honest. But creating a space for personal writing is sort of like an easier way for students to really be open and reflective. Teachers can give prompts that students have to write about in a way that's confidential, that the students don't need to share as long as they're writing. It could be a really impactful way of facilitating students to be reflective and open. Of course, it's ideal to not collect these kinds of works to ensure the confidentiality, but there is a way of having some accountability where you could have a writing assignment, let's say for 10 minutes, and then afterwards, everyone has to write something like, or say something like, how'd you find that? Was it helpful? Was it meaningful? Requiring students to reflect on what the process was like could be a way of creating a little bit more accountability to make sure that they actually did it. But if it's relatively easy, I think a lot of students would do it and find it meaningful and can grow from it. So these are the things that stuck out to me. I'm wondering what you found as a useful takeaway for the book.